Hello, my name is Autumn Barnhart, and I will be giving you an informative speech about women in medicine, specifically the first female doctors. So let's take you back a little bit in time to the Civil War. So that was between 1861 to 1865. So women at this time were kitchen staff in a lot of hospitals, but because of the Civil War and because so many men were out fighting in the war, they eventually had to become nurses because they needed help. So nothing could prepare the women for this because of the culture that they had been raised in and that they were living in currently. They weren't prepared for gunshot wounds, they weren't prepared for amputations, anything like that. So it's very tragic on some women, and some women just couldn't live with that. The women that were hired were middle-aged matrons. They were told to dress plainly, they were told to not draw attention to themselves. They were basically invisible. They were just there to take care of them and get out. They weren't supposed to be crazy involved in any of this at all. So post-Civil War, most of the women obviously went home. They couldn't work in the hospitals anymore. Over 95% of them were never paid. And a lot of the lower class women wanted to go back and work with doctors and be nurses, but because the upper class women didn't advocate for this, the lower class women didn't have anybody to advocate for them either, so they never got to go back and work. So that was in 1865. So now let's shift gears a little bit. So a mother and father immigrated to the U.S. from England because they were anti-slavists and they were activists, and they knew that America was supposed to be a free country and freedom of religion and things like that. So they thought they would be able to succeed there and that they could raise their family here. So they had two daughters, Elizabeth and Emily, and their mother was actually the first ordained minister. So from a very young age, it was instilled in them that women can do anything men can do, and that they were told and raised to go out and do things and to be strong in what they believe in and to use everything they can to their advantage because they were going to have to, simply because they were women and they weren't accepted in most fields. So Elizabeth moves to North Carolina, specifically Asheville, North Carolina, to become a teacher. Obviously, she was raised in an anti-slave household, so moving to the South, this was a very big adjustment for her. But the director at the school she worked in was previously a physician, and so she gained a lot of trust in him, obviously. And then his brother was still a practicing physician. So because she got closer with the director and his brother, they allowed her access to the brother's library of most of his books from medical school and things like that. So Elizabeth began studying really hard because she was very passionate about medicine and wanting to help people. So Elizabeth applied then to 29 medical schools, and Elizabeth was rejected by 29 medical schools. So then she decided she was going to pose as a man because men get accepted just because they were men and not even because they were smarter than her or anything like that. So she posed as a man, she got into medical school, she graduated from medical school, and she became the first female doctor. So right after medical school, she then wrote a book about how hygiene and exercise were better than pharmacology and surgery. So those of you who don't know what pharmacology is, that is just the prescribing of medications. So she wanted to make lifestyle changes to her patients instead of just automatically prescribing medicine. She was way before her time and before her era, because even today there are still studies and arguments done on why lifestyle changes are more beneficial than simply just taking a pill. And not only that, she was also a female in medicine, so she was just making crazy advancements more than most men. So this is where heroic medicine comes into play. This is what was being practiced at the time. So this was methods of shock therapy to the body, to shock the body out of illness and back into health. And this isn't electric shock. These are things like making the person sweat. This is things like bloodletting. So that is like essentially trying to do a blood transfusion, but they didn't have the technology we have today to do that, so it didn't oftentimes work. But in today's medicine, heroic medicine is considered like chemo and radiation for cancer when it can't be removed surgically. So that is the shock of the body back into health. This is meaning. So obviously she was trying to figure out a way to get around this. And then her and her sister, Emily, this is where Emily comes in, she became a doctor and followed in Elizabeth's footsteps. She also had to pose as a man to get into medical school, but she did the same thing as Elizabeth, and she got through medical school. So they then opened the New York Infirmary for Indigenous Women and Children. So this hospital was staffed entirely by women, except for the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees was by prominent men. So because of that, they would put the men's name on certain things instead of the women's names, even though the women were running everything behind the scenes, just so they could get their foot in more doors, which is exactly what they did. So not only was it staffed entirely by women, but because it was open to specifically for women and children, and not only for white women, this is also an insane advancement that she made as well. Elizabeth and Emily believed in women's education and professional achievement before women's voting rights, so that is where they disagreed with some of the women's progressive movements happening at this time, because they wanted women to be educated. They didn't just want them to be able to vote, they wanted them to be educated, so after they voted, they could make more moves after that as well. Elizabeth and Emily then opened the Women's College of Medicine in 1868, so this is just 3 years after the Civil War and after women weren't even allowed to be nurses. They opened the College of Medicine. So this was different than other schools because they did progressive builds of lectures over time, and they also did boards after each year that they had to pass in order to be certified to go to their next year of medical school, because they really wanted these women to be educated, because that was one of the bases that a medical school is based off of. This then led to, in 1898, Cornell began accepting women, and so at 73 years old, Emily decided to close the school because it had served its purpose. So the school closed because now almost all other medical schools were allowing women to come. And then the New York Infirmary merged with New York Presbyterian Hospital in 1981, so that's not much long ago. And how this relates to us as women today going into medicine, they've paved the way for many women, because going from being 1 to 2 female doctors in the 1860s to, as of 2023, having 405,476 female doctors. So most medical schools accept more women, if not the same amount of women as men. And most people have come to know that compassion and care that does come from women is also medicine. So thank you for your time.